was kind of disappointed Brian didn't sing Sunday night. You know, usually always does. And Brian used to sing a lot. You know, I don't know if he got real hiccup or something. I don't know what happened. He kind of quit singing, but I enjoyed hearing him sing again. Helen Bill, you sing that song, didn't you? You like that song. Everybody likes that song. That's a real pretty song. Be sure and keep all of our sick people in your prayers. Roy was going to have that test on his leg today to find out about blood clots in his leg, but they didn't get to do it because...
Miss Warner just called and said she had to go to the hospital wanting prayer for her.
Who?
Miss Warner, the lady with the five little ones.
All right. Did she say what hospital?
No, she didn't.
Okay. Thank you. Let's keep them in prayer. There's a lot of sick people. But anyway, he didn't get to have the test made because his blood was too thin. They've been giving him blood thinner, and so I don't know. He went over and the doctor said, "Well, there's no way I'm going to do that until you thicken up your blood some more." But keep him in your prayers. And also, her brother or sister down in Arkansas, I don't remember which one it is real bad, and they had to go down there. So they may not be back by Sunday, but keep them in your prayers as they're traveling on the road. Continue to remember Grace. It just looks like she's not really going to get a whole lot better. Her ribs will heal up, but she's having to use a walker now to walk. And remember her in your prayers. And just remember all those that are sick. Remember my mother, and remember Grandma West. She's just really hoarse. What has she got, like bronchitis or something? Is that what it is?
Something like that, or allergies.
Yeah. Well, keep her in your prayers because... I'll go. They took up the offering. Archie said, "Boy, I almost threw my paycheck in that collection plate." He said, "I thought I had." And he said, "I'm not that spiritual." And I said, "Was it signed?" He said, "No." And I said, "Well, it wouldn't matter because I said Raymond's not that spiritual either." I said, "I think he forged your name to it." But we almost had a really good collection tonight. Listen, have the trustees met concerning the air conditioner or finance committee or anybody? I mean, the one we don't have. We don't have an air conditioner. We're going to need one right away. I thought maybe Sunday we might take up a special offering. Or, Bill, what you might do when you take up the offering Sunday is just say if anybody would like to give to the air conditioning fund, they can just put it in an envelope, mark it, or something. I'll let you handle it however you want to handle that. But we're going to need an air conditioner pretty quick. It's just not going to be very long. Sunday night we didn't have air conditioning. I thought it wasn't that miserable, but some of them were fanning, and I'd look back there and everybody was fanning with something. And it reminded me back when I was a little kid and I went to Broadway. And of course, back when I was a kid going to church, well, they didn't know what air conditioning was. You know, I mean, just you went to church, you'd better bring a little fan. You know, they had fans, but people would bring their own. And about all they had in a way to cool was just like this. You know, they had them all over the church, and they'd raise the windows in the summertime, and it just kind of brought back old memories. Everybody'd be sitting there fanning, you know. And you'd pick up one of those old fans, and it'd say Mobley Funeral Home. And Mobley would donate little fans, you know, to all the churches, I guess. I know Broadway got them anyway. They'd say Mobley Funeral Home. You know, and I think more people got saved back then, you know, because it was hot. They kind of knew what hell was like. And they'd fan, they'd read it and say, Mobley Funeral Home, you know, they go. and it just reminded me, you're going somewhere. And it had their phone number on it, so you... But those were the good old days, and we made it all right. But people nowadays, they like air conditioning. We like our creature comforts, and there's nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with it. We might go back to that if we can't raise enough money to buy an air conditioner. But Danny said air conditioner would be about $900 for the compressor and unit, and that's just for the auditorium. We don't really care about the little kids' classrooms. We don't go down there. No, we eventually want to air condition all of it, but we certainly need the auditorium because that's where I hang out most of the time, is in the auditorium. And we want. Well, I'm just kind of being silly now. Turn in your Bibles, if you will, to 11th chapter of Revelation. Boy, I'll tell you, I'm kind of excited. I got some really good news today, and if everything works out, well, if it really works out, I mean, if it really, really works out, maybe we can get that property next to us over here. I have a cousin who lives in Grove, Oklahoma, and his father-in-law is the head game warden of that whole part of the country down in there, which don't have anything to do with anything other than he's a personal friend of Albert Brumley. Now, Albert Brumley Sr., of course, died, and he turned his business over to his son. I guess it's Albert Brumley Jr., and he runs the publishing company. But evidently, Jim had given him a tape of some of my songs, and he gave them to Albert Brumley, and he really liked them. He said he wanted to publish them. So Jim's supposed to come down this Sunday, and I'm supposed to give him some more tapes. And if there's any money in it, maybe we'll get air conditioned around here. I don't know. Hey, if there's not much in it, we'll get some. I'll check with Mobley's, and we'll maybe we'll get enough to get some fans or something. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but anyway.
Don't get me what I want.
See, looky there. It's not a Mobley's, though, is it? No, it's not a Mobley's. What does yours say on it? Cradle roll or something like that. Huh?
Liquid Mary Jane shop at downtown.
Well, isn't that something? Yeah, well. See, you got to be spiritual to use one of them Mobley ones and not bother you, though. Turn to the 11th chapter of Revelation, if you will. 11th chapter of Revelation. And we are glad to have our visitors, and I don't know for sure, but I'd just probably say you're from the Baptist Student Union. Are you? I thought it was when I saw Crystal go back there, because I know she knows some of the kids that are in the Baptist Student Union, or go to the Baptist Student Union. But we're glad to have you tonight. We're really glad to have Helen and Betty back with us. They've been gone so long. They've been gadabouts, you know. Well, kinda. You was for a long time until you got sick, and her mother got sick. You all went off down to Arkansas and you was going, well, that's enough. I'll never let you forget it. You'll never live it down. But we're glad they're back. We're just glad to see everybody. Does anybody know where Darlene is tonight? What's the deal? Oh, okay. All right, Darlene, we're just checking on you. Because she's just about always here, and we're glad to have her here. The 11th chapter of Revelation. And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. Now, I noticed that in studying the book of Revelation, it's not always easy to know exactly when something is happening during the tribulation period. But we know this particular time has to be exactly right in the middle of the tribulation period, because he says he's saying here in 42 months, which is 3.5 years, then it'll all wind up. The tribulation period will be over. And do you remember last week, I guess it was last Wednesday night, when I told about the temples, the former temples that had been built, and how King David had contributed almost $2 billion himself to the temple that his son Solomon built. And it cost about 1/10 of $1 trillion to build the temple. And I want to bring this out that in 70, now the second temple they built, the one that was standing while Christ was alive, while Jesus was on earth, it wasn't even completed. They were still working on it. And in fact, it was completed in the year 64 A.D., and it was destroyed in 70 A.D. So they worked on it all those years, and then it was completed 6 years when it was destroyed. And do you remember Jesus gave the prophecy? He said, not one stone will stand upon another. Do you remember that? He said it will be completely destroyed. Well, it's amazing how God makes His Word, He has the power to bring His Word to pass. What happened was when Rome came in there, they set that temple on fire, and I mean, they burnt that thing, and all of the gold, it was inlaid with gold and silver, and the fire was so hot, it melted, and it ran down the walls, the stone walls, and even ran down in the cracks in the footing, in the foundation. So the Roman soldiers, when it cooled, they tore that thing completely apart, even dug the footing up to get the gold out. But God has ways of bringing His Word to pass. And truly, not one stone stood upon another. I mean, they scattered it everywhere to get that stone, to get that gold out of there. But he says in 42 months. Now, notice in Daniel, and you can turn if you want to, the 7th chapter of Daniel. I want to read, Daniel says the same thing. 7th chapter, I believe it's the 25th verse. Let me see. Speaking of the Antichrist, says, And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of times. Now the Jews, time was 1 year, times plural meant 2 years, and the dividing of times would be half a year. So it's what he's saying is in 3.5 years. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it unto the end. So he's saying the same thing. In 3.5 years, it'll all come to pass. And then in the book of Matthew, I would like to, or maybe it's in Luke. Let me see. It's in both places, but I don't know which one I want to read. I'll begin with the 21st chapter, 20th verse. And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in the Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these shall be the days of vengeance, and that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days, for there shall be in great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captivity into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And that's what he's talking about again, the 40 and 2 months. Now what's he referring to? Go to Daniel the 9th chapter if you want to. And I always notice just the spiritual ones do this, so I'm watching who. Archie, take names, will you? I want you. No. The 9th chapter says the Antichrist, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Now, just through studying Revelation, I see it as this. As soon as the church is taken out, as soon as the church is raptured out, the Antichrist comes on the scene, and he encourages or maybe even orders the rebuilding of the temple, the tribulation temple. And it's built, and as he builds the temple, and he makes a covenant with Israel for 7 years. But right in the middle of the 7 years, he breaks his covenant with Israel, and that's when Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel enter the holy place, and it's believed that he will go in there and offer sow on the altar. He said, you run for the hills. He says, woe to them that have little children. Woe to them that have little suckling babies. Woe to the women that are with child. But they're to run, and that's what he's talking about here, the 40 and 2 months. Now, he goes into the 2 witnesses, and we'll get into the 2 witnesses, but in the time frame, now here's the way I see that. I really believe at the very beginning of the tribulation period, the 2 witnesses will do their work, and they will prophesy for 3.5 years. And I believe they cease their prophesying, their preaching, right in the middle of right in the middle of the tribulation period. Now let's go into that. And I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. All right, that's 3.5 years. He said they'll prophesy for 3.5 years. I personally I'm inclined to believe that the 144,000 that are saved as a result of these 2 witnesses. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. In other words, these are 2 special messengers or witnesses that God sends to planet Earth. They are the light in a dark and dying world. In a dark time, they are spirit-filled witnesses. Now, it doesn't say who they are, so we can't say who they are dogmatically. But there's a lot of speculation as to who they are by what they do. Now, we know that in Malachi, he says that before the end of time, he will send Elijah. He will send Elijah. Now, we know that John the Baptist came in the spirit of Elijah, but he even said that he was not Elijah. So it's believed that one of these men will be Elijah, and it's believed, and some believe it'll be Enoch, but I'm inclined to believe the other one will be Moses that will come back and be these 2 witnesses, and we'll see why. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth, and devoureth their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. Do you remember that Elijah had power to call fire down from heaven and destroy his enemies? But it says the fire comes from their mouth. In other words, by their word. They have this tremendous power that God has given them. And they have the power to shut heaven that it rain not in the days of their prophesying. And once again, you remember Elijah closed heaven. He had the power to shut up heaven that it rain not. For 3.5 years there's no rain, and they have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. Do you remember all the plagues of Egypt? You remember that Moses had that power. God gave him the power to turn waters into blood, and to bring all kinds of plagues on the earth. I believe there'll be a lot more than what Moses, if it is Moses, worked the first time, because that was a local plague that was brought, and now it will be a worldwide thing. And it says God gives them to bring these plagues as they will, as they see the need. They can do these things as they see the need. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them. But now I want you to notice something. It's not until they finish their testimony. And I really believe this with all my heart, that when God saves you, He's got a purpose for your life. It may not be to preach from the pulpit. It may not be a gift or a ministry that's very noticeable to even the rest of the church. But we know that each one of us are members of one body, and we have a purpose. And I really believe that if you are a member of Christ's body and you're dedicated and you're trying to do God's will, I don't believe death can claim you till God is through with you. I really believe that. And listen, these men were not destroyed until they had finished their work. You remember Paul says, the time of my departure is at hand. He said, I have what? Run my course. I finished my course. He had finished the work that God had given him to do. Now, it's a little bit ironic, because last week we was talking about in testimonies that, and I said, well, Marion could thank God that he wasn't in a car wreck this week. Isn't that right? Because he was a couple of weeks ago. Now, Harry was in a car wreck this week. And Lou was in one. Where was you, Harry, when all that was going on? Oh, okay. Well, he didn't want me to leave her out. I thought maybe she was driving. That's what she was getting at. I didn't. Oh, she was backseat driving, yeah. Well, she didn't miss the guy behind you, and you didn't miss the one in front of you, did you? So neither one of you are very good drivers, I guess. But the point is this. I don't know the reason for that. I don't know the reason for that wreck. But I believe this. If you belong to God, nothing happens without God knowing about it. And maybe things like that happen just so it's God's way of letting you know that He is in control. And I know you're still here tonight. God's not through with you yet. Marion and Brian was in a bad wreck, and that could have been a fatal wreck, couldn't it? That could have very well, at the rate of speed that guy was traveling when he hit your car. But God wasn't through with you. And these witnesses, listen, the beast couldn't harm them. It says until they had finished their work. They'd finished their work. Jesus could not have gone to the cross until He had finished His work. Not a one of the apostles could have died until they had finished their work, because God sent them here to do a job. You know, Brother Copeland, some of you remember him, some of you don't. He was the founder of this church. He always said he wanted to die in church. And he did. He died there in church, sitting here in church. But he had a great ministry. But God didn't call him home until he had finished his work. There at Emmanuel Baptist Church in Sapulpa, I want to give one other illustration. There was a great preacher at one time, years and years ago. His name was Brother Harlan, and he was a real Bible preacher. He was a good preacher. And he was fairly old when he died. He pastored that church for years and years. But his wife, in her testimony, she'd always give her testimony, and she said, I don't want to die, she said, until Papa goes. Then I don't want to live any longer. She said, when His work is finished, she said, I feel like my work will be finished, because I'm His helpmate. And he died 6 o'clock one night, and she died 6 o'clock the next morning. Isn't that amazing? See, but nevertheless, Satan can't touch these. The Antichrist can't do a thing against these men until they had finished their work, their testimony. The beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them. Now, what that tells me is this. God is not going to be shocked when this happens. Because it's been written down what's exactly going to happen. Isn't that something? God already knows what's going to happen. But that's what I love about studying the Bible. God knows what's going to happen, and we know the outcome, and it turns out real good. Now notice, he kills them, and I'm on the wrong page because I was waving my Bible around. So start on the second seal. No, we'll go back up here. 8th verse, all right. And their dead bodies, now in the original it says carcasses. I mean, that really shows contempt, doesn't it? They're dead, in the original language it says carcasses. You know, not their dead bodies. I mean, that's a sign of respect, you know. If, for instance, if you go to a funeral, you wouldn't say, well, they did a good job on their carcass. You know, I mean, well, I mean, that would be disrespectful. You know, you refer a carcass to some kind of an animal if you call it a carcass. Well, that sounds kind of funny. I wish I hadn't said that. But anyway, it says that their dead bodies, but in the original it says their carcasses, shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. That was Jerusalem. It's called spiritual Sodom and Egypt because the sin. They rejected their Savior. And they of the people and kindreds and tongues and nations shall see their dead carcasses 3 days and a half, and shall not suffer their dead carcasses to be put in the graves. And they that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice over them, and make merry, and shall send gifts one to another, because these two prophets tormented them that dwell on the earth. Can you imagine them calling a worldwide holiday? And giving, exchanging presents like another Christmas. They're so glad to get the light turned off. See? And that's the way the world is. The world hates the light. Listen, if you're out of step with God, the last thing you want to be is around a Spirit-filled Christian. And I mean, these two men are Spirit-filled to the point that their words cut like knives and they can work miracles. And the world is so glad when they're finally dead, man, they exchange presents. Boy, that's something, isn't it? But it ain't over there. And after 3 days and a half, the Spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. I can imagine. Now, they probably see them, and think about this, 100 years ago, this would have been an impossibility. But because of satellite TV, see, and the world will be so glad. And now, can you imagine, you know how they do at Christmas, they have all kinds of Christmas parties and all the families get together. And I don't know about you people, I was in the position where I could, but every time I could, when the war was going on, I had it on Channel 7 because I was always wanting to know what was going on. And I imagine during that 3.5 days, there's such an atmosphere of party and merriment, and they're so relieved. I imagine all the TVs and all the cameras are glued right on those two prophets laying there in the street. And they're just rejoicing. Can you imagine? I mean, that would wreck their party. That'd make you want to take the tie back they give you. They're there, and they're watching this, and all of a sudden, the Spirit of life come back in these two people, two men. They stand on their feet. Then the world hears a voice from heaven say, "Come up hither." Now listen, it would scare them to death. It did. It scares them to death when they see that. And the same hour, as they ascended, the same hour, a great earthquake. And great fear fell on them that saw them. And they heard a great voice from heaven saying unto them, "Come up hither." Just imagine how you would feel. Now, just imagine you're watching television, and there's two guys laying in the street. They've been there 3.5 days. All of a sudden, and I imagine everybody's eye wasn't glued on it, but there'd be a bunch of people and the family around, and they're having turkey and dressing and stuff like you do on turkey. Boy, they're exchanging the presents. And somebody says, "Look at this!" And the whole family, the whole town, wherever people are, their eyes are glued to the television set. And these two men stand up. And then the next thing you hear, but it isn't over the speakers of the TV, it's a voice from heaven says, "Come up hither." And you see them go. It says, great fear fell on them because they heard a great voice. A great voice. A loud voice said, "Come up hither." and they ascended up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. And the same hour was there a great earthquake, and the 10th part of the city, which was Jerusalem, fell, and in the earthquake were slain of men 7,000, and the remnant were frightened and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. Now, before, a fourth of the people in the world was killed. And then at another time, a third of the people in the world was killed by the plagues and various things. So now over half of the population of the world is dead, and now another 7,000 of them died. And I imagine the rest of them's ready for a good psychiatrist after seeing those men come up and the voice from heaven. I imagine that really shook them up. All right, now, notice what happens in verse 15. And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven saying, great voices in heaven. The seventh angel sounded. Now that's very significant, because do you remember way back in the 5th chapter when the Lord was took the little book, the scroll, and it was sealed with 7 seals? All right, now that was title deed to planet Earth. Now he had opened the 6 seals. Now, the 7th seal contained the 6 seals. The 7th seal contained the trumpet judgments. All right, now, this is the last of the trumpet judgments. And the 7th angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven, because they know that this ends it up. They know that this winds it up. When that last seal is opened, whatever's under that last seal, then all the kingdoms of the earth belong to the Lord, see? And so there was a great, great voices in heaven. That means heaven was astir. I mean, there was rejoicing in heaven. Now, the whole world was furious. The whole world was angry. Because, as I said before, the world is not willing for Christ to rule and reign over them. If you think they are, read 2nd Psalms. Read 2nd Psalms. The world does not want Christ to rule and reign over them. Why would they? Individuals don't want Christ to rule and reign over them. I read a little deal that says, how you can have your own way and still be a Christian. How you can have your own way and still be a Christian. And the answer is, you can't. If you're a Christian, Christ rules you. He rules. You don't have your own way. Why? Because, see, the carnal mind is enmity against God. It's not subject to the laws of God, neither indeed can be. So, the world was angry. And the 7th angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of His Christ. And He shall reign forever and ever. And the 24 elders which sat before God on their seats, or their thrones, fell upon their faces and worshipped God, saying, we give Thee thanks, O Lord God Almighty, which art and wast, and art to come, because Thou hast taken to Thee Thy power and hast reigned. And the nations were angry, and Thy wrath is come, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged. In other words, he described everything that will be in this the last wind-up. He said that Christ is going to reign, the nations are going to be judged, there's going to be the great white throne judgment, and the nations were angry, and Thy wrath is come. They were mad because the wrath of God is coming. You see, now keep in mind, this is the last half of the 3.5 years, which is called the time of Jacob's trouble. Now, we've just studied the first half of the tribulation period, and it was a horrible time on earth. Do y'all agree it was a horrible time on earth? It's nothing compared to what's coming. It's nothing compared to... Now, God is getting ready to pour out the very wine of the wrath of God on earth, because He's getting ready to take back His kingdom. And the nations were angry, and Thy wrath is come, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged, and that Thou shouldest give reward unto Thy servants, the prophets, and to the saints, and them that fear Thy name, small and great, and shouldest destroy them which destroy the earth. And the temple of God was opened in heaven, and there was seen in His temple the ark of His testament. And there were lightnings and voices and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail, because now He's getting ready to wind it up. Now's going to be the bowl judgment, and that will wind it up. But it's amazing. They looked, and there was God's temple in heaven. How many realized that the temple, the tabernacle, was patterned after the tabernacle that's in heaven? Did you know that? Did you know there's a tabernacle in heaven? There sure is. God told Moses, build it just exactly like the tabernacle that I showed you in heaven. Isn't that something? And he said, I looked and I saw the tabernacle, the temple in heaven, and I saw the ark. And he said, in it was all of the covenants and the promises that belonged to Israel. Now, we know that in heaven, it says over there in Revelation that there's no temple there because God is the light of it, and there's no temple. But he's talking about Israel. See, Israel has a temple. We're the bride of Christ. We are the temple of the Holy Spirit. The church is the temple. But the Jews have a temple, and he looked and he saw a temple, but he saw the Ark of the Testament, and he just reminded John that I'm going to keep every covenant and every promise that I ever made to Israel. He said, I'm getting ready to wind it up. I'm getting ready to wind it. And we find in the rest of the book where that he saves the whole nation. It's amazing. God and his wisdom. It's absolutely amazing how that God broke off the Jews and grafted in the Gentiles. But Paul said, did God cast away his people? He said, oh, God forbid. He said, he set them aside so that the Gentiles could be grafted in. But he said he's going to cut off the wild olive and he's going to bring in the natural olive. And that's what John saw. He said, oh, I saw the temple. And I saw the Ark of the Testament and all the covenants and the promises that God made to Israel. And we find later on that the whole nation of Israel saved in one day. It's just amazing. You see, Israel has never completely inherited the promised land. Never has. They never have had all the land that God promised them. Never has. And we sing songs of Beulah land. Brian sings one of the prettiest songs I've heard called Beulah Land. They've never had their Beulah land. The Beulah land is when the lion will lay down with the lamb. And when there's complete peace with Jesus as ruling over the earth. That's the Beulah land. But listen, God promised them the Beulah land. And they're going to have their Beulah land. Aren't you glad that you serve a covenant-keeping God? Boy, I am. Listen, God kept every covenant that he made with any man. For whosoever call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. And he keeps that covenant. But he keeps every covenant that he made with the Jews. Listen, for his sake. Because he can't go back on his word. And you know, I really believe this with all my heart. I believe all down through time, he said that Israel was a stiff-necked, rebellious people. I mean, they'd go after idols and everything. But I believe every time he looked down to see Israel, even though they backslidden, you know what I believe he saw? Abraham. He made the covenant with Abraham. He said, Abraham, you see the stars in heaven, so shall thy seed be. You see the sand of the sea, so shall thy seed be. I believe every time he looked at Israel, he saw Abraham because he made the covenant with Abraham. But do you know what else that brings me joy? Every time he sees you, he sees Christ. Isn't that great? I mean, you just honor as you can be. You can't drive. We know that. But you see, he made the covenant with Christ. He made a covenant with Christ. Boy, I'll tell you what, aren't you glad? Aren't you glad we don't serve a God that's the same in power as Satan, and we got to wait and see how this thing's going to turn out? Aren't you glad we just say, man, I hope we can pull it off. We're on the Lord's side, and we're doing all we can, and man, I hope he wins in the end. Woo! Man, I might switch sides because you can look outside, we're way outnumbered. I don't know if you know that or not. I know how Davy Crockett felt there at the Alamo, We're outnumbered. But listen, we serve a God that can bring it to pass. I mean, he is omnipotent. He is all-powerful. But there's a mystery, and he's going to reveal the mystery. And the mystery is, why has God allowed sin? Why has he allowed Satan to do this for 5, 6, 7,000 years? And he said, it's a mystery, but God has a reason for it. You say, what is that? I don't know. But God had a reason for it. But he's going to bring it all down. The only thing I can think about, the only thing I can think of, and this is not worth anything, but I got 4 minutes, so I'm going to talk for 1 minute. I remember Brother Marion loaned me a tape one time by Jack Hiles. And he told a story in there that it really made impression on me. He said when he was a little bitty boy, his mama used to embroidery. And he said, I was a little bitty. He said, Mom would sit there be embroidering. And he said, all I could see was the underside of what she was embroidering. She'd be sitting there embroidering. He said, man, I'd see black threads running everywhere, and there'd be a little bit of gold threads, but oh, it's just horrible looking, because you know how the backside of something embroidered looks, just threads going everywhere. And I'd say, boy, Mama, that's ugly. You know, I don't like that. All that black, I don't like that. You know, just threads going everywhere. But when she got through, he said, she pulled me up in her lap, and I saw the top side of it. And he said, it's true, there was some black. He said, all that gold was woven in her. He said, that was the prettiest thing I ever saw. He said, but what made the gold so pretty was the black contrast. See? I mean, Marion probably had a good day today because he didn't have a wreck. See, you didn't know how good a day could be till you don't have a wreck. Isn't that right? He got all the way to work back without having a wreck. And you know, if it wasn't, listen, now let me tell you what happened. We went out of town. We went out of town Monday. We was going to stay till Wednesday, but I got worrying about the people in the church, and I said, we got some sick people, and Roy's going to have that. And I said, I'm just not enjoying this. Let's come on home. But anyway, Monday she had a bad headache. I mean, she had a bad headache. And I didn't want to just tell her I want to go home. You know, do you ever have premonitions? Well, they never usually amount to anything, but I just felt bad. I said, we need to get home. I just feel like we need to get home. And so we got in the car and we started driving, you know. And I said, you know, we just will go home. I said, I thought, look at the weather. It's cloudy and it's windy and stuff. She said, oh, it's a beautiful day. And I thought, I said, why? She said, oh, I don't have a headache. I mean, she wouldn't care if it had been sleet and snowballs that big around. It's a beautiful day because she wasn't in pain. I never had a headache, see, because so it was kind of a miserable, dreary day to me. See, oh, I know it. See, and the point I'm trying to get through, if we don't have any trials, if we don't have any tribulations, if we don't know what sin is, we don't know what redemption is, we don't know what deliverance is. You see, I really believe this. Those that suffer the most for Christ is going to enjoy heaven the most. See, you've got to have that contrast. You know, if you had a good day every day, it wouldn't be a good day. It'd be a normal day. Isn't that right? When I was a little kid, and I'm going to close with this because I got one more minute. When I was a little kid, I remember it was long in the spring. I was going to school, and I got up, and it was the most beautiful spring day I ever saw. I mean, it was ideal. The temperature was ideal. It was probably like 72 degrees. Not a cloud in the sky. The wind wasn't blowing. Oh, I just said to myself, oh, I wish it was like this every day. Man, this would be great if it was like this every day. And it was for like 3 weeks. I got tired of it. Really, I did. It was just perfect every day. But finally it got to where, well, this, you know, what's the big deal? See? But if it wind blows, it's rain, then when you have a real pretty day, Harry can say, man, where's my fishing pole? I'm going fishing. See, you've got to have that contrast. Now, I'm not trying to say that's what God's mystery is, but God had a reason for allowing us to suffer. God had a reason for sin reigning. Now, He didn't plan it, but He had a reason for allowing it. But He's going to bring it all to a conclusion. He's going to put Satan in the bottomless pit, and he'll be there forever and ever. He's going to do away with sin. The sinner's going to be done away with. As I said before, no more dirty T-shirts and bumper stickers. Man, that'll be heaven right there. If you could just get all the filthy language off the streets, off the TV, off the car bumpers, and off the T-shirts, that'd be a great improvement, wouldn't it, right there? So one day that's going to come to pass. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. We sang a song, maybe it was down at, I think it's down at Jess's church. Won't it be wonderful there? How many have heard that? Oh, it's a pretty song. I believe it's down at Jess's where we sing. Oh, it's a beautiful song. It's going to be wonderful there. Let's stand. Let's stand. Now, remember, you all promised to bring 2 people with you Easter morning, or something like that. Didn't you say that? Or did I just ask you to do that? Do the best you can. Bring somebody with you. Bring somebody that's not saved. Let's see if we can get them saved. Marion, would you dismiss us?
Our blessed Heavenly Father, Lord, as we come to you again, Father, it's been good to be about now. Hear your word, Father, just help us